I stared at my computer screen in shock as 40 faces watched my career implode. "We have proof of your expense fraud, Carrie. $3,000 in unauthorized travel," HR Director Diane announced coldly on the company-wide Zoom. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately." As the words hung in the air, my system access vanished before my eyes. Through my panic, a single clear thought emerged. The federal contract, the mandatory site inspections. With trembling fingers, I forwarded one receipt from my phone to the federal auditor with the subject line: "Required site inspection documentation." 5 years of my professional life had been dedicated to Jetstream solutions. I joined as an eager project coordinator, fresh out of college with my business administration degree, determined to prove myself. The company specialized in government contract work, primarily in compliance and regulatory services for federal agencies. Through consistent hard work and long hours, I had gradually worked my way up to senior analyst, and then, 6 months ago, to project manager for our most critical federal compliance contract. The promotion had come with both pride and pressure. The contract required regular inspections of regional facilities to ensure they met federal standards. These inspections meant frequent travel to sites across 3 states. I took the responsibility seriously, meticulously documenting every visit and filing detailed reports. The work was demanding but fulfilling, knowing that proper compliance kept these facilities safe and operational. My direct supervisor, Andrew Thompson, had always been supportive but perpetually overworked. In his late 40s with 2 teenagers at home, Andrew balanced multiple projects and often relied on my thoroughness and attention to detail. "Carrie, you're the only one I never have to double-check," he'd say with genuine appreciation. I valued his mentorship and straightforward management style. The company's leadership team included several key players who would later become central to my nightmare. Diane Keller, the HR director, was efficient but cold, viewing employees as resources rather than people. Scott Peterson, the finance director, was a numbers guy who rarely engaged with project teams outside of budget meetings. Then there was Jessica Woodward, the vice president, who had initially approved all my travel for the compliance project. Jessica had been my champion during my promotion, praising my work ethic to upper management. Lately, though, she'd grown strangely distant. The most challenging workplace relationship was with Jason Reynolds, the assistant director who seemed to view my promotion as a personal affront. Jason had joined the company from a competitor just 8 months earlier and quickly established himself as ambitious and politically savvy. He had a knack for taking credit for successful initiatives while distancing himself from problems. Behind his perfect smile and designer suits, Jason subtly undermined my work in management meetings, questioning my travel expenses and suggesting my site reports were unnecessarily detailed. Over the past month, I'd noticed Jason and Jessica having frequent closed-door meetings, which was unusual given their different departmental responsibilities. The few times I walked past her office during these discussions, their conversations would immediately halt, replaced with overly casual small talk. Something felt off, but I was too focused on meeting our project deadlines to investigate further. The turning point came during my inspection of the Westridge facility, one of our largest compliance sites. While reviewing their safety protocols, I discovered they'd been operating with outdated emergency response procedures for months, a serious violation of federal requirements. I documented the issue thoroughly and reported it up the chain, expecting immediate corrective action. Jessica called me into her office the next day. "Carrie, about the Westridge situation," she began, carefully closing her door. "Let's handle this quietly. We don't need excessive documentation that might raise flags with the auditors." I was stunned. But this is exactly what we're supposed to be monitoring. It's a clear violation. Just work with them to fix it without creating a paper trail of the lapse, Jessica insisted. The contract renewal is coming up, and we can't afford complications. I left her office deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't just cutting corners, it was potentially illegal. That night, I documented the conversation in my personal records, a habit that would ultimately save my career and reputation. I had no idea then that within weeks, I would be publicly fired and humiliated for doing exactly what my job required. The atmosphere at Jetstream Solutions grew increasingly tense in the weeks following the Westridge incident. I continued my regular site visits, focusing on thorough documentation despite Jessica's concerning directive. Each location required careful inspection of safety protocols, staff training records, and operational procedures to ensure federal compliance. The travel was exhausting, long drives to remote facilities, overnight stays in budget hotels, early mornings and late evenings, but I remained committed to maintaining proper standards. I began noticing Jason taking an unusual interest in my travel schedule and expense reports. Twice, I returned to the office to find him chatting with my administrative assistant about my whereabouts. Just trying to coordinate our site visits, he explained with his practiced smile, though his role had never previously involved direct site inspections. 3 weeks before my firing, I stayed late finalizing a quarterly compliance report. Walking to the printer, I found budget documents left open on the machine. Normally, I wouldn't look at restricted financial information, but a highlighted section caught my eye. Funds were being reallocated from our compliance project to a new initiative labeled Project Aurora, with Jason listed as the lead. The diverted amount was substantial, $30,000 shifted from travel and inspection budgets. I quickly took a photo of the document with my phone before returning it to the printer tray, a knot forming in my stomach. The next day, I discreetly asked Andrew about Project Aurora. "First I'm hearing of it," he said, frowning. "Where did you see that?" When I explained, his expression grew troubled. Budget reallocations should go through proper channels, including me. Let me look into it. He never got back to me, and when I followed up a week later, he awkwardly changed the subject. The avoidance was unlike him, increasing my unease about the situation. Throughout this period, I maintained meticulous records of all my travel. Every trip had prior email approval from Jessica, detailed expense reports with attached receipts, and thorough site visit documentation. I even started forwarding key emails to my personal account, a precaution that seemed paranoid at the time but proved prescient. Jessica's attitude toward me continued to deteriorate. During our weekly project review, she questioned expenses she had previously approved. "Do you really need to physically visit the Lakewood site again?" she asked, scrutinizing my travel request. "That's the third visit this quarter. The federal guidelines require quarterly inspections of all primary facilities," I reminded her. "It's literally in our contract requirements. See if you can combine trips or do some virtually," she suggested dismissively. "We need to be budget conscious." Later that same day, I overheard a tense conversation while passing by the small conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and Jason's voice carried into the hallway. "We're exposed, Jessica," he said urgently. "We need to contain the situation before the auditors arrive." "Lower your voice," Jessica hissed. "It's being handled." I walked away quickly, my heart racing. Whatever was happening, it clearly involved the compliance project and potentially fraudulent activity. That evening, I reached out to Andrew, hoping my trusted supervisor could provide some clarity or guidance. "Can we talk off-site?" I texted him. "Something's not right with the compliance project." We met for coffee the next morning before work. Andrew looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. I've been excluded from leadership meetings for the past 2 weeks, he admitted. Every time I ask about budget adjustments or project changes, I get vague responses about restructuring priorities. Do you think they're manipulating the compliance reports? I asked quietly. Andrew ran a hand through his graying hair. I don't know, Carrie, but document everything and be careful. Jessica and the CEO have been close for years. If something improper is happening, we need irrefutable evidence. His warning only intensified my vigilance. I began creating backup copies of all my work, storing detailed records of every conversation, approval, and site visit. Something was clearly wrong, and my instincts screamed that I was being set up to take a fall. The night before my termination, I received an email that confirmed my worst fears. It was marked urgent from the Federal Contracts Office, addressed to our compliance team, announcing an audit scheduled for the following week. The message requested all documentation for site inspections completed in the past 6 months, with particular attention to the facilities I had flagged for violations. I forwarded the audit notice to Jessica, Andrew, and the relevant team members. Within minutes, Jessica called me. I'll handle the audit preparations, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. Just focus on your current site visit reports. Shouldn't we meet to coordinate our documentation? I asked. Some of these sites had serious compliance issues that— I said I'll handle it, she interrupted sharply. Just finish your regular work. After we hung up, I received a calendar invitation for an all-hands Zoom meeting the next morning. Unusual timing for our typically scheduling conscious company. The knot in my stomach tightened as I sensed the trap closing around me. Still, I never imagined they would execute their plan with such ruthless public humiliation. The company-wide Zoom call was scheduled for 9 in the morning. I logged in early, as was my habit, noticing an unusually high attendance for a routine meeting. Even the CEO, Thomas Brennan, was present, a rarity for departmental updates. Jessica's camera was off, which struck me as odd given her position, while Diane from HR sat with perfect posture, her expression professionally neutral. After brief announcements about quarterly targets, Thomas cleared his throat. I'll now hand things over to Diane for an important company update. Diane nodded briskly. Thank you. This is difficult, but it's necessary to address a serious situation. She looked directly into the camera. Carrie Walker, we have evidence of expense fraud committed by you over the past 3 months. We have proof you've been expense fraud $3,000 in unauthorized travel expenses. My mind went blank with shock as 40 colleagues watched in silence. Your explanations for these expenses have been inconsistent with company policy, she continued clinically. Due to this financial misconduct, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Scott from finance jumped in. We've already restricted your system access and will send instructions for returning company property. I found my voice, though it came out strangled. This is a mistake. All my travel was approved for the federal compliance. This decision is final, Diane cut me off. HR will email you separation details. As she spoke, my email notifications stopped arriving on my phone. My VPN connection to the company's server disappeared. 5 years of professional dedication erased in under 3 minutes. Are there any other business items? Thomas asked, moving on as if they hadn't just destroyed someone's career in front of the entire company. The meeting continued while I sat frozen, tears threatening but held back by sheer determination not to break down publicly. Through my shock, I remembered the federal audit scheduled for the following week. The mandatory site inspections I'd conducted, the very travel they were now calling fraudulent, were required by federal regulations. With trembling fingers, I located my most recent site inspection receipt on my phone and forwarded it to Mark Williams, the federal auditor I'd met during the contract review. Subject line: Required site inspection documentation. When the Zoom call finally ended, my professionalism shattered. I collapsed at my desk, sobbing uncontrollably. 5 years of dedication, hundreds of hours of overtime, countless successful projects, all ended with a public accusation of fraud. My phone began buzzing with text messages from shocked colleagues, but I couldn't bear to read them. 20 minutes later, as I struggled to compose myself, my personal phone rang. It was Tanya Morris from the legal department. "Carrie, what the hell happened?" she demanded, without preamble. "They fired me for expense fraud," I managed, my voice still shaky, "for the compliance travel that Jessica approved herself." Tanya lowered her voice. "Listen to me. That was not normal protocol. We never fire people in company-wide meetings, especially not for alleged financial misconduct. Something weird is happening. They said I misappropriated $3,000, I explained, but every trip was documented and approved. "Do you have copies of the approvals?" Tanya asked urgently. "Yes, I've been forwarding important emails to my personal account," I confirmed. I had a feeling something was off. "Smart girl," Tanya said. "Forward me everything you have. This doesn't add up." After hanging up, I began searching through my personal email archives, organizing the evidence that could clear my name. Each trip had a clear approval chain: my request, Jessica's written authorization, confirmation of the visit from site managers, and detailed expense reports with attached receipts. Everything was properly documented and completely legitimate. But as I reviewed Jessica's approval emails, I noticed something disturbing. When I checked my company email archive through my phone's cached version, several of Jessica's approval messages were missing. Someone had deleted key emails from the company server emails, proving she had authorized the exact expenses I was now being fired for. While combing through my records, I discovered another discrepancy that made my blood run cold. The site inspection schedule showed several locations that Jason had claimed to visit personally, but the documentation was suspiciously vague. For 3 critical facilities, there were no detailed reports, no specific findings, just generic compliance-confirmed notations with his digital signature. My phone rang again, an unknown number. "Carrie Walker?" a deep voice asked when I answered. "Yes." "Who's this?" "Mark Williams, Federal Compliance Division. I just received your email with the inspection receipt. Can you explain why you're sending this from a personal account?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Williams, I was just terminated during a company-wide meeting for allegedly fraudulent travel expenses, the very expenses incurred conducting the mandatory site inspections for the federal contract." There was a long pause. "That's concerning. Those inspections are required under Section 4.7 of the contract." "I know. I've completed all required inspections and documented everything meticulously. But it appears someone at the company has been deleting my approval emails and possibly falsifying other inspection reports." "Miss Walker, this is a serious allegation," Mark said gravely. "Would you be willing to provide your documentation for review? If mandatory inspections weren't completed or were falsified, we're looking at potential contract fraud." "I'll send everything I have," I promised, feeling the first glimmer of hope. "And, Mr. Williams, there's a scheduled audit next week. I believe they fired me to prevent me from speaking with your team." "We'll get to the bottom of this," he assured me. "Send your documentation as soon as possible." After hanging up, I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. The federal auditor taking me seriously validated my concerns, but I was still unemployed, publicly humiliated, and now potentially involved in exposing major fraud at my former company. My professional reputation hung in the balance, and I had no idea how deep the deception might go or who else might be involved. The day after my shocking termination, I woke up with the hollow feeling that accompanies profound loss. My career, which had been on an upward trajectory just 24 hours earlier, now lay in shambles. The accusation of financial fraud would make finding comparable employment nearly impossible without clearing my name. I spent the morning organizing my evidence for Mark Williams, the federal auditor. My dining room table became command central, covered with printed emails, expense reports, and site inspection documentation. Every receipt, every approval, every inspection report, all meticulously categorized and time-stamped. At 11, Mark called. "I've reviewed your initial documents," he said without preamble. "The site inspections you conducted were not only authorized but mandatory under federal regulations. Missing or falsifying these would constitute a serious contract violation." "That's what I've been trying to explain," I said, relief flooding through me. Every inspection was necessary and approved. "What's concerning," Mark continued, "is that we received quarterly compliance certifications signed by Jason Reynolds claiming all inspections were completed properly. If he certified inspections he didn't conduct, that's potentially federal fraud." "I noticed discrepancies in his reported site visits," I confirmed. 3 facilities have generic reports with no specific details. "We need to verify this independently," Mark decided. "Do you have contact information for the site managers you worked with?" I did. Over the next 2 hours, I provided Mark with names, numbers, and email addresses for every facility manager I'd met during inspections. He would contact them directly to confirm my visits and determine whether Jason had actually conducted the inspections he claimed. Meanwhile, I received a text from a former colleague, Pat from the IT department. "Check your personal email. Sent you something important." The email contained a company calendar screenshot showing a presentation scheduled for next Monday, 3 days before the federal audit titled Project Aurora Launch with Jason, listed as the presenter. "What's Project Aurora?" I texted back. "New initiative using compliance budget," Pat replied. "Jason's been working on it for months. Big presentation to leadership team, plus federal contract officers." I immediately forwarded this to Mark, adding my discovery of the budget reallocation documents. The picture was becoming clearer. Funds designated for mandatory compliance work were being diverted to Jason's pet project, while my legitimate travel expenses for required inspections were being labeled fraudulent. That afternoon, I reached out to several site managers directly, carefully explaining my situation and asking if they could confirm my visits. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. "Of course I remember your inspections," said Linda from the Westridge facility. "You spent 2 days reviewing our safety protocols and flagged several critical issues we needed to address." "Did Jason Reynolds also conduct an inspection?" I asked casually. "Jason who?" "No, you were the only compliance officer who visited this quarter. Should someone else have come?" This pattern repeated with each manager I contacted. All confirmed my thorough inspections, while none recalled meeting Jason despite his reported visits. By evening, Mark called again. "Miss Walker, the site managers I've spoken with have confirmed your visits and the thoroughness of your inspections. None recall meeting Mr. Reynolds, despite his certification that he conducted supplementary inspections." "What happens now?" I asked. "We're expanding our investigation," Mark explained. "This appears to involve systemic misrepresentation and potentially misappropriation of federal contract funds. I've escalated this to our enforcement division." The validation brought tears to my eyes. Someone believed me. The next day, Tanya called with news from inside Jetstream. "They're scrambling," she whispered. Federal auditors have been contacting site managers, and leadership is trying to figure out who's talking. Have they mentioned me? I asked. Jessica keeps saying you were fired for legitimate reasons and this is just retaliation, Tanya reported. But Scott from finance looked really uncomfortable during the emergency meeting. I think he knows something's wrong. What about Andrew? Completely sidelined. They're not including him in any discussions about the audit or your termination. I spent the rest of the day digging deeper into the financial records I had access to. By cross-referencing travel vouchers with inspection dates, I discovered a disturbing pattern. Funds allocated for compliance inspections had been systematically diverted to other cost centers over the past 4 months, totaling approximately $180,000. Meanwhile, Jason had been submitting minimal travel expenses while claiming to conduct the same inspections I was performing. That evening, another bombshell dropped. A colleague from accounting texted me. Did you know J and J have been dating? Against company policy since she's senior leadership. Jason and Jessica. The personal connection explained the preferential treatment and closed-door meetings. It also suggested a powerful motive. Jessica protecting her secret boyfriend's career advancement at my expense. The following morning, Pat from IT sent another covert email. Company announcing Jason's promotion to compliance director next week. He'll be leading the federal audit response team. The timing couldn't be more suspicious. If Jason became compliance director before the audit, he would control the narrative and potentially bury evidence of the fraudulent inspection reports. I immediately forwarded this information to Mark. His response came quickly. This confirms our suspicions. The audit team will arrive Monday at 8:15 a.m. We're bringing additional investigators given the evidence of potential fraud. For the first time since my termination, I felt a glimmer of hope that truth might prevail. The carefully constructed deception was beginning to unravel, thread by thread, revealing a pattern of fraud much larger than my supposedly unauthorized expenses. Someone would finally be held accountable, but I still had no job, no income, and a damaged professional reputation to repair. The weekend after my termination brought the full weight of my situation crashing down. I had been so focused on gathering evidence and coordinating with the federal auditor that I hadn't processed the practical implications of sudden unemployment. Sitting at my kitchen table Sunday morning, I stared at my laptop screen, calculating my financial runway. My savings would cover expenses for maybe 3 months if I was extremely careful. The mortgage payment for my small condo was due in 2 weeks. My health insurance would terminate at the end of the month. I opened LinkedIn to begin job searching, only to find 3 connection requests from former colleagues had been withdrawn. My termination story had clearly made the rounds, tainted by allegations of financial misconduct. Who would hire someone fired for expense fraud? Tears welled up as I contemplated the unfairness. 5 years of exceptional work erased by a calculated lie designed to protect the guilty. The public humiliation of being fired in front of 40 colleagues played on repeat in my mind. My chest tightened with anxiety as the magnitude of the damage to my career and reputation sank in. My phone rang, interrupting the spiral of despair. It was Andrew. Carrie, can we meet somewhere private? I've been doing some digging. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop 20 minutes from the office, where we were unlikely to encounter other Jetstream employees. Andrew looked haggard when he arrived, with rumpled clothes and 2 days of stubble. I'm so sorry about what happened, he began, sliding into the booth across from me. I had no idea they were planning to terminate you, especially not like that. Have you learned anything useful? I asked, too emotionally drained for pleasantries. Andrew nodded grimly. After your firing, I started reviewing all the compliance documentation for the past 6 months. There are massive gaps. Jason has been submitting generalized reports without specific findings or proper documentation for at least 7 facilities. I found similar discrepancies, I confirmed. None of the site managers recall meeting him. It gets worse, Andrew continued, lowering his voice. I located the budget reallocations you mentioned. $180,000 diverted from compliance activities to Project Aurora since March. What exactly is Project Aurora? Andrew's expression darkened. It's a proprietary compliance tracking software Jason proposed. He's been telling leadership it will revolutionize our federal contract management and save hundreds of thousands in travel and inspection costs. So they diverted actual compliance funds to build a system that would supposedly make compliance cheaper in the future? I clarified. Exactly. The problem is they used funds explicitly designated for mandatory inspections under the current contract. That's textbook misappropriation of federal contract funds. And Jessica approved all this? Andrew nodded. She's been championing Jason's project to the board. What you don't know is that she's up for COO next quarter. Project Aurora is her ticket to the promotion innovative, cost-saving, and impressive to the board. She sacrificed contract compliance for career advancement, I summarized bitterly. And when your thorough inspections started highlighting compliance failures that should have been caught earlier, Andrew trailed off. I became a threat to both their careers and their scheme, I finished. So they eliminated me and labeled me the fraudster to cover their tracks. Together, we constructed a detailed timeline on my laptop, correlating the diverted funds with missed or falsified inspections and mapping the parallel development of Project Aurora. The pattern was undeniable once all pieces were arranged chronologically. Systematic fraud orchestrated by Jason, approved by Jessica, with my legitimate work deliberately undermined to conceal their actions. The federal audit is tomorrow, I reminded Andrew. Are you going to be there? He shifted uncomfortably. I've been told my presence isn't necessary since Jason is handling the compliance presentation. They're sidelining you because you know too much, I pointed out. Andrew ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I've worked at Jetstream for 11 years, Carrie. I can't just throw that away. I have kids in college, a mortgage. I understood his hesitation but felt disappointed. What will you do if the auditors ask you directly about the inspection discrepancies? I'll tell the truth, he promised. I just can't be the one to volunteer the information first. After Andrew left, I received a disturbing call from Tanya in legal. Carrie, you need to know what's happening inside, she warned. Jessica is telling people you were unstable and vengeful after being passed over for a promotion. She's suggesting you might have deliberately sabotaged reports to make Jason look bad. The character assassination stung even though I should have expected it. That's ridiculous. There's documented evidence of my work. I know that, but she's controlling the narrative internally, Tanya explained. And she's making sure everyone knows you're under financial investigation, so your allegations against the company won't seem credible. I ended the call feeling physically ill. Not content with firing me under false pretenses, they were actively working to destroy my professional reputation to protect themselves. The injustice burned like acid. That evening, as I was updating my evidence files, Mark Williams called with news that shifted the entire situation. Miss Walker, I wanted to update you before tomorrow's audit, he began formally. Our preliminary investigation has revealed that the compliance failures you documented are much more extensive than initially apparent. The company has been certifying full contract compliance while missing critical inspections and safety protocols. How serious is it? I asked. Serious enough that the company could lose all federal contracts if these violations are confirmed during tomorrow's audit, Mark said gravely. We're talking potential penalties in the millions and possible debarment from future government contracts for up to 3 years. I sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what he was saying. Jetstream derived over 60% of its revenue from government contracts. Losing them would be catastrophically damaging to the company, potentially resulting in massive layoffs affecting hundreds of employees, including many good people who had nothing to do with the fraud. This isn't just about your termination anymore, Mark continued. The documentation you provided revealed systematic fraud that endangers federal operations and potentially public safety at these facilities. Our team will arrive at 8:15 tomorrow morning with additional investigators from the Contract Compliance Division. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my dining table, surrounded by the evidence of corruption that had cost me my job. While vindication seemed increasingly likely, I took no pleasure in the knowledge that many innocent colleagues might soon face unemployment due to leadership's unethical actions. I sent Andrew a text. Federal audit tomorrow more serious than expected. Contract termination possible. Innocent people will be affected. Consider your position carefully. His response came an hour later. We'll do what's right. See you tomorrow. I stared at the message in confusion. See you tomorrow? I hadn't planned to be at the audit. As I pondered his meaning, exhaustion overtook me. Whatever tomorrow would bring, I needed rest to face it. I fell into a troubled sleep, dreaming of accusatory faces and falling careers, my subconscious wrestling with the complex emotions of seeking justice, while knowing its ripple effects would touch many lives beyond the guilty parties. Monday morning arrived with a weight of anticipation. Despite not being invited, I decided to position myself near Jetstream's offices to witness the federal audit team's arrival. Parked across the street, I watched the glass office building with a mix of anxiety and vindication as black government vehicles pulled up precisely at 8:15. My phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. All hands emergency meeting called in main conference room. Audit team already here asking questions about you. 15 minutes later, Andrew called. Carrie, you need to come in. Now. What? I've been fired. They won't let me in the building. Trust me, he insisted. Use your badge at the side entrance. It still works. Come to conference room A, hurry. Confused but intrigued, I drove around to the employee parking lot. Sure enough, my badge granted access at the side door. Apparently, HR had been too flustered to deactivate it properly. Heart pounding, I made my way to the main conference room, trying to avoid being seen. Outside the conference room, Andrew waited, looking simultaneously anxious and determined. The auditors specifically asked for you. When they found out you'd been terminated, they demanded an explanation. What's happening in there? I whispered. Complete chaos, Andrew said with grim satisfaction. Mark Williams asked who was responsible for the Westridge facility inspection. Jason claimed he personally verified compliance there. Then Mark pulled out your detailed report documenting serious safety violations, the same ones Jessica told you to handle quietly. Before Andrew could continue, the conference room door opened. Mark Williams stood there, his imposing 6'4" frame filling the doorway. Behind him, I glimpsed a table full of tense executives, including Jessica, Jason, Diane from HR, Scott from Finance, and Thomas Brennan, the CEO. Miss Walker, Mark acknowledged with a professional nod. Thank you for coming. Please join us. Walking into that conference room was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done. All eyes turned to me, some surprised, some hostile, some confused. Jessica's face paled visibly when she saw me, while Jason maintained his practiced neutral expression, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. For those who don't know, Mark addressed the room. Miss Walker has provided extensive documentation demonstrating that she conducted all required site inspections under your federal contract, despite being terminated for allegedly fraudulent travel expenses related to these very inspections. Thomas Brennan looked confused. Miss Walker was terminated for submitting unauthorized travel expenses, as documented by our finance department. Mark raised an eyebrow. Interesting, since federal regulations explicitly require these inspections, and Miss Walker has provided approvals for all travel in question. Those approvals were altered after the fact, Jason interjected smoothly. Finance discovered the discrepancies during a routine audit. I couldn't remain silent any longer. That's a lie. I have the original email approvals Jessica sent, including metadata proving they were sent before the travel occurred. Jessica shifted uncomfortably as Mark placed a folder on the table. We've independently verified Miss Walker's inspections with site managers at all 12 facilities. They confirmed her visits, the thoroughness of her work, and most interestingly, that none of them recall meeting Mr. Reynolds, despite his certification that he conducted supplementary inspections. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Scott from finance was the first to recover. There must be some misunderstanding. Our records show— Your records, Mark interrupted, show $180,000 diverted from mandated compliance activities to a project called Aurora. Can someone explain how funds specifically allocated for federal contract compliance were repurposed? Without proper authorization? All eyes turned to Jason, who maintained remarkable composure. Project Aurora is a compliance enhancement initiative designed to improve efficiency. The budget adjustments were approved through proper channels. By whom? Mark asked pointedly. Vice President Woodward authorized the budget reallocation, Jason replied without hesitation, throwing Jessica under the bus at the first sign of trouble. Jessica's professional facade cracked. The reallocation was presented to me as a temporary fund, shifting that wouldn't impact contract obligations. Yet, you still approved terminating Miss Walker for conducting the very inspections required by that contract, Mark noted coldly. The CEO finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Williams? Mark straightened to his full height. Based on preliminary findings, we're investigating possible contract fraud, misappropriation of federal funds, and falsification of federal compliance records. These are serious violations that could result in contract termination, financial penalties, and potential criminal charges. The company attorney, until now silent, went visibly pale. Surely this is a misunderstanding that can be resolved without such extreme measures. That will depend on full cooperation and immediate corrective action, Mark replied. We'll need complete access to all records and staff interviews. We're particularly interested in understanding who made the decision to terminate Miss Walker and why. Diane from HR spoke up, clearly trying to distance herself from the unfolding disaster. The termination recommendation came from Miss Woodward, based on finance reports provided by Mr. Reynolds. I simply executed the process as directed. The blame shifting was already beginning. Thomas Brennan looked furious as he pieced together what had happened under his leadership. We will cooperate fully with the investigation and take appropriate internal actions. Andrew, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. I have additional documentation that may be relevant. He placed a USB drive on the table. This contains the original inspection schedule, budget allocations, and an internal audit I conducted over the weekend, comparing reported compliance with actual site conditions. Jason's composure finally broke. Thompson wasn't authorized to conduct any independent audit. His information is unreliable and likely manipulated to support Walker's claims. Actually, Andrew countered calmly, as Senior Director of Project Management, oversight of all project documentation falls within my purview. I simply compared official records with actual site reports. As the executives began arguing among themselves, Mark pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "We've been investigating Jason Reynolds since before this incident. He was suspected of similar financial manipulation at his previous employer, Meridian Systems." "You knew about him?" I asked incredulously. "We had suspicions, but insufficient evidence to act," Mark explained. "When you sent that receipt and your subsequent documentation, it provided the connection we needed. His pattern of diverting compliance funds while falsifying inspection reports matches exactly what happened at Meridian before they lost their government contracts." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jason wasn't just an ambitious colleague cutting corners. He was a serial fraudster who had moved from company to company, exploiting systems and sacrificing others to advance his career and line his pockets. As this bombshell sank in, the conference room door burst open. A woman I recognized as the company's external counsel rushed in, looking grim. After a hurried, whispered conversation with the CEO, Thomas Brennan stood. "In light of these serious allegations, we're temporarily suspending Mr. Reynolds and Miss Woodward pending a full investigation," he announced, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Miss Walker, on behalf of Jetstream Solutions, I apologize for your termination. We would like to meet privately to discuss reinstatement." The federal investigation team took control of the meeting from that point, outlining the documentation they required and the interview process that would follow. I sat in stunned silence, watching the company I'd dedicated 5 years to facing a crisis that threatened its very existence. Despite everything they'd done to me, I took no pleasure in seeing the panicked faces of employees passing by the conference room, whispering about the presence of federal investigators. As the meeting concluded, Thomas asked me to join him in his office. Andrew gave me an encouraging nod as I followed the CEO, still processing the whirlwind of revelations and rapid shifts in fortune. Justice was being served, but the aftermath would be complex and far-reaching for everyone involved. The weeks following the federal audit were a whirlwind of interviews, investigations, and organizational upheaval at Jetstream Solutions. The full extent of the fraud was even more significant than initially suspected, with federal authorities uncovering a systematic pattern of compliance shortcuts and financial misrepresentations spanning multiple contracts. 3 days after the audit, Thomas Brennan called me personally. "Carrie, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "I failed as a CEO by not properly overseeing key operations and by trusting the wrong people. You were punished for doing exactly what your job required." "I appreciate that," I responded carefully, still processing my complicated feelings about the company. "We'd like to offer you not just reinstatement, but a promotion," Thomas continued. "The position of compliance director with a 30% salary increase and reporting directly to me. We need someone with your integrity to rebuild our compliance program properly." The offer was tempting but raised concerns. "What about the federal contracts? Will there even be a compliance program to run?" "We're cooperating fully with the investigation," Thomas explained. "While there will be penalties and increased oversight, the authorities have indicated that with proper corrective action, total debarment can be avoided. Your reinstatement is actually part of our remediation plan." I took a week to consider the offer, consulting with friends, family, and even Mark Williams about the wisdom of returning. Ultimately, the opportunity to rebuild the program properly with direct CEO support and increased authority, convinced me to accept. My first day back was surreal. Walking through the office doors, I was met with a mixture of reactions, apologetic smiles, embarrassed glances, and genuine welcomes from those who had suspected the truth all along. Tanya from legal gave me a fierce hug in the hallway. "I knew you'd be vindicated," she whispered, though I never expected such a spectacular implosion. The implosion had indeed been spectacular. Jason and Jessica both faced federal charges for contract fraud and misappropriation of funds. The investigation revealed that Jason had been siphoning portions of the diverted compliance budget to consulting companies owned by friends, receiving kickbacks in the process. Jessica had been both professionally and romantically involved, allowing the fraud to continue while focusing on her COO ambitions. Scott from finance admitted to being pressured by Jessica to flag my legitimate expenses after I began documenting compliance failures at key facilities. "She made it seem like you were padding travel unnecessarily," he explained during a formal apology meeting. "I should have verified the contract requirements more thoroughly." Diane from HR received a formal reprimand for the improper termination process. Firing someone for alleged financial misconduct during an all-hands meeting violated multiple company policies, Thomas explained during a staff meeting addressing the changes. "We're implementing new termination protocols with appropriate due process protections." My new role came with both authority and challenges. The compliance department needed complete restructuring, with proper checks and balances to prevent future fraud. I insisted on transparency protocols that required multiple approvals for any budget changes and direct reporting channels for inspectors to document compliance issues without fear of retaliation. Andrew was promoted to Vice President of Operations, replacing Jessica. His courage in stepping forward with evidence, despite personal risk, had impressed senior leadership. "Sometimes doing the right thing is terrifying," he confided during our first strategy meeting. "But I couldn't live with myself if I'd stayed silent." The federal authorities imposed significant penalties on Jetstream, $3 million in fines plus restitution for all compliance activities that had been improperly skipped or abbreviated. The company remained on probationary status with enhanced oversight requirements for 2 years, but critically, was allowed to continue performing government contracts with proper remediation. Project Aurora, ironically, was completely redesigned under my supervision to become a legitimate compliance tracking system with robust verification protocols, rather than the smoke and mirrors cost-cutting tool Jason had envisioned. The properly developed system eventually won recognition from federal partners as an industry best practice. 6 months after my return, I stood at the front of our largest conference room, leading a company-wide training session on ethical practices and compliance requirements. As I looked out at the faces of colleagues both old and new, I reflected on the painful journey that had brought me to this moment. Integrity isn't just about following rules, I told the attentive room. It's about having the courage to stand up when something doesn't seem right, even when it would be easier to look the other way. It's about thorough documentation and proper processes, not just for their own sake, but because people's safety and livelihoods depend on us doing things correctly. Thomas Brennan, sitting in the back row, nodded in agreement. The company had survived a crisis that could have destroyed it, emerging with stronger ethical foundations and more robust compliance systems. The experience had transformed not just individual careers but the entire organizational culture. After the training, Thomas approached me. "The federal auditors gave us exceptional marks on our quarterly review. They specifically mentioned your leadership as key to our successful remediation. We still have work to do," I reminded him. "But we're on the right track. You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, "when all this first happened, I worried saving the company would be impossible. What I've learned is that one person with integrity and detailed documentation can make all the difference. I smiled, thinking of that desperate moment when I forwarded a single receipt to the federal auditor from my phone while being publicly fired. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. That evening, I cleared out the last of the folders from my dining room table, my impromptu command center, during the investigation. The crisis had taught me invaluable lessons. The importance of meticulous documentation, the courage to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and the understanding that true professional worth isn't determined by a title or even a job, but by commitment to doing work with integrity. In the face of injustice, I hadn't just survived. I had fought back and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in my abilities and values. The path hadn't been easy, and the emotional scars from that public humiliation would take time to fully heal, but the experience had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. As I closed the final folder, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected champions who had stood beside me: Andrew, with his quiet courage; Tanya, with her fierce loyalty; Mark Williams, with his unwavering commitment to the truth; and even the site managers who had verified my work when it mattered most. Justice rarely comes from standing alone. It emerges from a collective commitment to truth and accountability. My phone pinged with a text from Andrew. "Compliance team dinner still on for tomorrow? The new inspectors want to celebrate their first quarter with 0 findings." "Absolutely," I replied, smiling. Some accomplishment deserve recognition, and that perhaps was the greatest lesson of all, recognizing that while systems can be corrupted and people can be misled, integrity ultimately prevails when enough individuals refuse to compromise their principles. My single receipt had started an avalanche that exposed fraud, reformed a company, and restored justice. Sometimes the smallest stand for truth can create the most profound change. Have you ever faced a situation where your integrity was challenged, or witnessed someone being wrongfully accused? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of resilience and justice, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for what's right. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, document everything, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of one person's commitment to truth.